This is Akashvani. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on India's view at World Energy Congress 2024. The participants are Anil Razdan, former Secretary, Ministry of Power, and S. Rangabashiam, anchor.
Mr. Razdan, a warm welcome to the program. We'll be talking about World Energy Congress, which was held recently in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. A lot of issues were discussed. A number of stakeholders from across business sectors and countries and policymakers were there to interact and ponder over this question of energy transition. But as far as India's stand is concerned, Mr. Razdan, what do you feel is the way ahead?
I think, the way ahead has been similar over the last 2 decades. There is a growing acknowledgement that India is a growing power, not only in terms of population, but also in terms of human talent, and a place where development is taking place. It's a place which needs investment in the right sectors, having a population which is technologically now quite advanced. The IT sector is well established. We've been advising people globally. Factories of the world have also started coming here. And we increasingly, I think, and rightly so, are beginning to represent the developing world. We are talking on their behalf, not only on our own behalf, because they need to grow equitably and in the right direction. Yes, we appreciate the environmental crisis that is approaching. We know that the adverse impacts of this crisis are going to affect people of the developing world more and are probably going to have a negative impact on a lot of underprivileged populations across the world. So I think India is a country which, with its vast technological talent, its increasingly modernized infrastructure, its banking system, its financial system, and also, let's face it, our youth and not so young people in the older generation, are heading many of the global organizations, whether financial or technological, across the world. So we have the capability to lead. I think increasingly so we should have the confidence to lead, but not lead selfishly. We've got to lead as leaders of the developing world. We want energy, we want equity, we want to protect the environment, and we want to resolve this whole process efficiently in the least cost and in the most sustainable manner.
Mr. Razdan, India has set for itself rather an ambitious target of zero emissions by the year 2070. We are some 4.5 decades away from that target. What do you feel in this period of 45 years? Will India be able to seamlessly kind of transition from fossil fuels, whether we talk about coal for electricity production or petrol and diesel for transportation and even others, that from there we'll be able to make a smooth transition to renewables and zero carbon footprint fuels?
It is not an easy task for a country which is growing and growing so rapidly, where people need fuel. We need energy for all our needs, but we are transforming. We moved away from inefficient fuels to piped gas and gradually into electricity. That's as far as the household sector is concerned. Now, when you come to industrial sectors, there again, you need large chunks of energy. Electricity, particularly as you are banking on into the future, it seems that electricity rather than liquid fuels that you are talking, they would be the backbone of the energy growth. There is solar, there is wind, there is hydro energy, which is renewable. But then solar and wind are intermittent and they need storage. Hydro is not the same the whole year around. Reservoir levels keep going up and down. At the moment, for example, the southern reservoirs in the country are very low. And water also has a drinking water need and irrigation need. All this water, before being supplied for that purpose, can also be used for production of electricity. Develop a baseload power, which is constant. And nuclear is certainly the best option, not because I worked in that department for 5 years. But I think, all said and done, it is one of the cleanest source in its life cycle. Long years ago, there used to be an exercise carried out that how much coal you have to carry and how much energy is wasted in carrying that coal to thermal power stations as compared to the very small amounts of nuclear fuel that need to be transported across. A lot of exercises have shown that yes, it is the most efficient way of producing bulk power. And as you mentioned, the topic of baseload power, which has to be topped up with the other renewable power and maybe at times, and why maybe, will be at times with battery power. Now, battery power adds another level of cost to the whole process and also materials for making those batteries. For example, lithium at the moment that is being talked about. There could be other metals. We need to work strongly in that direction. I feel this coming age is going to be the age of the chemical engineer. He's got to find what are the best chemistry that we can do to develop these technologies. And even as the fossil fuels are being phased out, what are the uses that you can make of these fossil fuels where you are not emitting carbon dioxide, you are embedding it. That kind of chemistry will need to be studied, implemented. And when you are emitting carbon dioxide, again to trap that carbon and to convert it into useful compounds or chemicals. We are rich in coal, but then coal is not for burning alone. Coal can be coal to liquid, coal to chemicals, and even in the interregnum, while the thermal power stations are there, capturing coal and converting it into other compounds which are not harmful to the environment. Of course, all this will merit investment. It will involve costs, which we will have to factor into the whole process.
Yeah.
But who is to finance this transition? That is a major question. And there I think those who have polluted the environment ever since the Industrial Revolution, who've caused this global warming, they must put the dollars on the table for this transition.
So that should be proportionately more now. Like you can't say that let's have a level playing field while compensating the environment and saying that whether it's a developed country or a developing country, they all chip in equally. So that should not be the policy. There should be a differentiation. The developed countries and people who have polluted more should proportionately pay more. Isn't it, Mr. Razdan?
In terms of the environmental discussions, I think the Kyoto Protocol was certainly more just and equitable protocol where common but differentiated responsibility principle was the guiding light. It was diluted over the past few decades, but I think we have restored it, particularly in the G20 deliberations and some of the more recent multilateral deliberations. I, in my tenure, right from Joint Secretary in the Government of India and as Additional Secretary and as Secretary in the Energy Ministries, I've been banging this point that yes, we have a responsibility, but we have a differentiated responsibility. And those who've caused this global warming and are rich, it's not that those who've caused this damage are poor and can't afford it. They have the resources and they must share it. If the earth is one, the spending kitty must be one also. And we must push the developed world into a green. Now there are forums, you see, there are fora like the G8, etc., etc. Now these were the developed countries of the world. Now in G20, India had played a very stellar role and a very competent role in trying to encompass the discussions and encapsulate them at the end to a consensus, to whatever consensus could be achieved, by and large, a very happy consensus, and also rope in the African nations as a group. That, I think, has been a very significant improvement because the United Nations is a large body which includes everybody. But then it has its privileged and non-privileged members, the Security Council, the General Assembly, and it keeps going on and on. It's a debating forum. It has its bodies doing very good work. But yes, we need a more active mechanism. We need a mechanism where the developing world has a stronger voice and it's implementation oriented rather than discussion and debate oriented. But a developer of the world, a just and equitable developer.
Mr. Razdan, let's also talk about the transportation sector. And as you would agree that in the last 5 years, a lot of focus has shifted to electric vehicles, a lot of policy announcements, and we have also seen, sales going up in this particular segment. On the face of it, electric vehicles looks to be really, clean energy vehicles. But if you see the back end, it tells a different story. For charging these electric vehicles, you need electricity, which probably would be produced from a thermal power plant which uses coal. In a way, it is contributing to the carbon footprint, isn't it?
Of course it is, because you see, it will be polluting, as I say, it was used to be said about nuclear power at one stage, not in my backyard. So while you see it in the immediate vicinity, you may not have those fumes from petroleum products, but in those coal producing plants, etc., you will have those fumes. But then the argument is, why not convert all our electricity or most of it to renewable energy? But I think that has its limitations because of variability of power and the need to store it, which adds to the cost. So we need a greater thrust on baseload power. And that, I think, the answer is nuclear. There does not seem to be a very strong alternative at the moment. I think China has been working on that strategy quite ably for a while, building up their nuclear base, and they've been able to declare their peaking, whereas yet we are not, I think, in a position yet to declare when will we peak. We are growing also, of course, and we cannot make that declaration right away. We've got to study the situation, see what technology is affordable, where we can produce power. We also have a landmass issue, a land crunch. We have a density of population per unit of land which is quite high. So all said and done, not because I worked 5 years in the nuclear sector, but I think that nuclear power is the option to go for baseload power in the days of the future. Now, whether that nuclear power in the future are going to be large plants or small and medium reactors, those are issues which I think as time evolves and safety issues and other issues are handled in parallel, that can be done. But there is no escape, I think, from moving away from nuclear as a baseload power.
Mr. Razdan, before we wind up this discussion, let's also talk about the moolah. Where does it come from? The finances. And the energy sector, whether it is fossil fuels, whether it is nuclear, whether it is solar power, they are all capital intensive sectors. So don't you think we should look at other ways of funding these expansion projects, maybe by tapping the bond market?
These options will have to be not only explored, but developed and put in place, because without energy, you will not be able to follow your other development plans. And those development plans all of them will need energy. Now, if your systems are going to work on the IT, whether it is banking or it is traffic signals or it are other day-to-day activities in life, all these need energy, electricity, but stable electricity. You can't have blackouts or brownouts or whatever you might call them. You need a steady voltage, you need steady supply. And for that, you've got to ensure that the electricity companies are profit-making companies which offer good returns to all investors. And probably in the times to come, give a reasonable tariff to the investor also, so that ultimately people have to invest in the sector, whether you call it through bonds or whatever it is. Money will find its way to places where there's a safe and steady return, if not a very high return, but it must compete with the other competing sectors of investment.
Mr. Razdan, it's been a pleasure talking to you about this issue. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
You were listening to a discussion on India's view at World Energy Congress 2024. The participants were Anil Razdan, former Secretary, Ministry of Power, and S. Rangabashiam, anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 9289 094 044.